Sounds good.
So I'll be talking about a couple of the most common tree fruit diseases that we'll see, pesticide resistance, as well as some diseases and issues we see with raspberries. So start out with corynneum blight. It's a fungal disease. It's also called shot hole disease because the leaves look like you took a shotgun and you blasted them. You get all these holes, and I show pictures of that in a second. It affects stone fruits like peaches, apricots, cherries. And the symptoms you see on the leaves are small spots that turn necrotic or brown, and those small holes will eventually fall out, giving the leaves the shot hole appearance. You also get spots on fruit, and you can sometimes get gumming on cankers near the buds or on large stems, and you can also get tip dieback. So here are some pictures, and I don't know if you can see the cursor. On the upper left here, we have a peach fruit with symptoms of corynneum blight. And these lesions are superficial. So if you just peel the skin off, you can eat the fruit underneath. It's perfectly fine. On the upper right here, we have the symptoms on the leaves, and you can see those brown lesions, and they eventually fall out, and you get these holes in the leaves. And on the bottom here, we have it on cherries, and on cherries, I think it looks very similar to hail damage. And then on the bottom right here, we have a canker here right by that bud. To manage shot hole or corynneum blight, you want to avoid wetting the foliage. So the spores, the fungal spores, are actually produced on these brown lesions. And if you have water running over those lesions, you wash the spores off those leaves onto the fruit and the leaves below, and then these spores germinate and cause new infections. Prune out infected buds in the dormant season when you see them. There are chemical products available. You can use fixed copper applications or Zyram at leaf fall. And then in the spring and summer of the following year, use fungicide applications of Zyram, Captan, or chlorothalonil. That's especially the case if you had problems the previous year. Now, fire blight is another very common disease we see in Utah, probably the most common tree fruit disease. It's a bacterial disease caused by Arvinia amylovera. It affects apples and pears and some other rosaceous plants. You can find it also on ornamentals like cotoneaster and mountain ash. It's transmitted by insects indirectly as well as splashing rain. So insects like bees and flies are attracted to the bacteria that are oozing from fruit or branches because they smell sweet, and they land on those bacteria, and then they have them all over their body, and then they fly to the flowers to pollinate them, and in the process they deposit the bacteria and they cause an infection. The symptoms you see initially is that the blossoms turn brown or necrotic, and then eventually the twigs and the branches start to die back as the bacteria move towards the main trunk through the vascular tissue. Here we have some pictures. So these, in the upper left, we have a pear fruit that has bacteria oozing from the fruit, and you can picture, rain splashing on that fruit and then splashing the bacteria to the nearby leaves, causing an infection. Or if there is another fruit available, it could cause the infection there too. On shoots in the spring, the first thing you see often is the tip of a young shoot that's dying back. Sometimes you see this bent tip, it's called a shepherd's crook. And then you see the leaves dying back going towards the main branch and then the trunk. I found this picture online. It was an orchard in Illinois that was obviously badly managed, and you can see all these fire blight infections on those trees. And eventually they did prune the tree, but from what I've heard, it was too late, so they had to remove all these trees because they were so severely infected that they couldn't get any crops anymore from those trees. To manage fire blight, you want to monitor your trees in the spring, look for new shoots that are dying back, watch for bacteria that are oozing from existing cankers. So cankers are big wounds on a big branch. And if you have dry conditions and that area where the wound is looks wet, that's an indication that bacteria might be oozing from those branches and those wounds. So you want to treat those with a copper product if possible. Pruning works really well to manage fire blight. Remove diseased branches as soon as you see them. During the growing season, you want to cut off an infected branch at least 12 inches below the symptomatic tissue. So on this picture in the upper right, you see like the first couple of leaves are brown. Those leaves below outside that picture might still be green, but you want to still go 12 inches beyond where the leaves are dead and cut it off there because the bacteria have already moved on. You just don't see the symptoms yet. If you cut the branch off right where the dead leaves end, you will start pruning again in a couple of weeks later. During the dormant season, when the bacteria are not active, 6 to 8 inches beyond where you see the symptoms are sufficient. And if you have severely infected trees, just remove them because all you do is provide inoculum to infect new trees that you plant. And I have been to a few orchards that had a lot of severely infected older trees. And they would only remove the trees that have actually died. And they would put a new tree right next to a severely infected tree that was oozing bacteria. Those new trees have no chance at all. They will die within 3 or 4 years at the latest. For chemical control, if you're a commercial grower, there are antibiotics available, streptomycin and kasugamycin. There's also copper products you can apply. If you use them in the springtime for flower protection, some apple varieties are sensitive to copper products and you might see some russeting on the apples. I have used copper products on apple varieties that were considered sensitive, and I've not seen a problem with that. And there are also some biological control products that you can use. For a homeowner, antibiotics are not available, but the copper products and biological control products would be available to you. Now with antibiotics, there is always the issue of resistance to the antibiotics. And in 2011, we did a survey on apple and pear orchards in Utah. And streptomycin had been used for years in these orchards. And the first resistance was observed in 2006. A lot of the growers then stopped using streptomycin and they were just curious if the resistance was still present. And in our survey, we found that the bacteria in 80% of these orchards were still resistant, even all these years later. And there was no use of antibiotics at all since then. So this resistance stays around for a long time. We might be doing another survey for resistance to streptomycin in maybe the next few years, just to see if anything has changed. So when we do a resistance survey, we have bacteria growing on an artificial medium. We punch a hole in the middle of that petri dish, and then we add either water or 100 parts per million of streptomycin or 1,000 parts per million. So if you don't get a halo around that hole, that indicates that the isolate is resistant to streptomycin. On the bottom, you see the halo developing on the 100 parts per million as well as the 1,000 parts per million, indicating that the isolate is still sensitive to streptomycin. How does resistance develop? So before the pesticide application, in year 1, you have a lot of sensitive isolates in an orchard and you have one resistant one. So you apply your pesticide and you kill 99% of the sensitive ones, and you have one sensitive one and one resistant one left. In year 2, both of those will multiply, so now 50% of your population is resistant and 50% is sensitive. You apply the same pesticide again, you kill all the sensitive ones, and all you have left is resistant isolates. And then in year 3, your product will no longer work. This is also very similar to resistance that happens with fungicides. I often get calls from people that say, oh, I've applied that same fungicide for 20 years and it doesn't work anymore. That is because the fungus has become resistant to that fungicide. So there's currently fungicides belonging to 40 different chemical classes that are on the market. So there's a broad selection. They're classified based on what part of the fungal physiology they attack. Some attack more than one aspect and others not. And fungicides that only attack one aspect of the fungal physiology have a high possibility of resistance development. And there have been fungi becoming resistant to the DMI fungicides, the QI fungicides, those are the strobilurins, as well as others. And I keep focusing on the DMIs and the strobilurins. Those are the most common ones that have problems. So DMI fungicides inhibit the synthesis of ergosterol, which the fungi need to produce their cell walls. And if you have a resistant fungus, it has a mutation in a gene, so they do not accumulate the fungicide in their cells, and therefore the fungicide is ineffective. With the QI or strobilurin fungicides, they inhibit the respiration of the mitochondria. And if you have a mutation that then changes the binding site based on the amino acids, the fungicide can no longer attach and cannot stop the oxygen uptake by the fungus. So if you have a sensitive isolate on the bottom left here, the fungal enzyme can attach to that fungicide and the fungus is dead. Now this binding site has changed on the bottom right here, and the fungicide can no longer connect with the fungal enzyme and the fungus is resistant. So to manage fungicide resistance, you need to look at the chemical classes. Every fungicide belongs to a chemical class. The chemical classes have numbers assigned to them. They're called the FRAC code. And when you go to that website here, you can find a whole list of all these FRAC codes. And here's a couple of examples. So, for example, Raleigh, which is myclopudonil. It's also a fungicide you could use for powdery mildew on grapes. It has a FRAC code number of 3. And then Heritage, which is a strobilurin, has a FRAC code of 11. So fungicides come with their label. They have the group number or class number listed on that label. So companies try to make it easy for you to pick a good fungicide. And some fungicides have more than one active ingredient belonging to 2 different fungicide classes, and then they would both be listed. This is a screenshot of the website that I just showed you, and you can see the FRAC code here. You can get some more information on the chemical, and then you can see the common names of these chemicals. And so they have different active ingredient names, but they all belong to the same class. So when you choose a fungicide, let's say you apply Heritage, and then you switch to another fungicide, you cannot just switch to a different product in that same fungal class, because it will target the fungus at the same physiological spot as the Heritage does. So instead of using insignia, you would have to go and look for a different chemical group and use a fungicide for those. You can't just switch between names. Also, the labels have information on how often fungicides can be applied, as well as the total amount of fungicide per season or per acre. The chemical companies want to make sure that their fungicides stay effective, and so they restrict how much you can use it. If you need to do multiple applications of fungicides, don't use the same fungicide from the same frag group because that can result in resistance. So it's very essential that you switch between fungicides from different chemical classes. Now we'll switch from tree fruit to raspberries. We get occasionally questions about raspberry bushy dwarf virus. In recent years, we have not seen any samples that were positive. You can get up to 100% yield loss. It's spread and introduced either on infected planting material, or it can be pollen transmitted as well as seed transmitted. Symptoms, so the name is actually misleading. You get venochlorosis and the leaves turn yellow, and some varieties will show no foliar symptoms. You get crumbly fruit, which causes then the yield loss. There is some varieties like meager that will have shorter canes. Here are some pictures. So here you see a leaf with that venochlorosis. And here the yellowing of the leaves, and then on the bottom you see that crumbly fruit that you can get. But some of the crumbly fruit in some years can also be from poor pollination. Raspberry bushy dwarf virus can also go to blackberries, and then you also get the small crumbly fruit that develops. Management for raspberry bushy dwarf, plant certified disease-free plants. There are some resistant varieties like Hader, Chilcotine, and Willamette. And if you have infected plants, I would remove them. Since the virus can be pollen transmitted, the pollen could move to healthy plants and then cause infection. Most common what we see is nutrient deficiency in raspberries. And we did a survey a few years ago, and the most common nutrient deficiency was manganese, followed by zinc. Frequently, those plants had extremely high levels of iron and nitrogen. A lot of the growers had actually applied iron because they thought the symptoms they had was because of iron chlorosis and iron deficiency, and that was actually not the case. It was manganese and zinc. The symptoms of all of these micronutrient deficiencies actually look very similar. And sometimes the magnesium deficiency you see on the bottom here is actually mistaken for raspberry bushy dwarf virus. Except with magnesium deficiency, you have intervenal chlorosis, so the area between the veins is yellow, whereas with raspberry bushy dwarf, it's the actual veins that are yellow, and the area in between is still green. Also, if soil sterilants have been used in the past, they can also cause similar symptoms. And that is all that I had. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right, we have one so far from Stephen. He asked, with the foliar application of lactobacillus kill fire blight bacteria? Or will a foliar application of lactobacillus kill fire blight?
I don't know. I have not tried it.
Okay.
Some of these biological control products are more effective than others because the organism in the biological control product have their own environmental requirements. So that is something to keep in mind. If you read that a biological control product works really well in Washington State, where it's a lot wetter, more humid than in Utah, it might work there. It may not be as effective as here in Utah. But Blossom Protect was one that we tried a few years ago, and that worked pretty good.
Okay. A couple more. So Brandon Orr asked, are there any new diseases in Utah that we need to be on the lookout for, or anything that you think we need to look out for, I guess?
For tree fruit, not that I have come across any. I have actually not gotten any tree fruit samples in the last couple of years.
Okay. And Shauna asked, we have noticed that too much water will cause yellow leaves and raspberries. Heat affects that too. Different varieties tolerate the heat better. John Jay is one of those that tolerate the heat. So that's a variety of raspberry.
Yeah, and I think that could very well be. I'm not familiar with that particular variety, but especially if you have heavy soils and you water a lot, the roots might stay too wet and they might almost drown.
Yep. And it does leach out some of the micronutrients too if there is too much water. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
good. Yeah. Good one to notice.
I would suggest getting a foliar nutrient test if you see symptoms that resemble iron chlorosis, just to make sure it really is iron chlorosis and not magnesium or manganese or zinc.